Live from the BDN Studios, it's Bang and Dang.
That's awesome.
If you don't like that, then
You ain't black.
the Battle of Hatteras Inlet Batteries, August 28th and 29th, 1861, was the first combined operation of the Union Army and the Navy working together.
This is the first time they have worked together, and I believe the Confederates actually get on some naval action. They haven't really yet.
Nice.
So,
The North Carolina Sounds occupy most of the coast from Cape Lookout, that's in North Carolina, to the Virginia border, with their eastern borders marked by the Outer Banks. They were almost ideally located for raiding northern maritime commerce. Cape Hatteras, the easternmost point in the Confederacy, is within sight of the Gulf Stream, which moves at a speed of about 3 knots. All right, moves about 3 knots. Ships in the Caribbean trade would reduce the time of their homeward journeys to New York, Philadelphia, or Boston. By riding the stream to the north, raiders, either privateers or state-owned vessels, could lie inside, protected from both the weather and from Yankee blockaders, until an undefended victim appeared. Watchers stationed at the Hatteras lighthouse would then signal a raider, which would dash out and make a capture. Nice. Off to being able to return the very same day. Sweet.
yeah, imagine who figured out all these
Little hiding spots in
well, not only that, like streams in the ocean. Like, hey, man, you go to this latitude and you hit this stream, you don't got to do nothing. It'll take you wherever the hell you need to go.
Right, take it straight north and south.
Well, to protect the raiders from the federal reprisal, the state of North Carolina, immediately after seceding from the Union, established forts at the inlet. I would assume so. Waterways that allowed entrance to and... Oh, yeah, right.
Okay.
In 1861, only 4 inlets were deep enough for ocean-going vessels to pass.
All right.
Beaufort, Ocracoke, Hatteras, and Oregon inlets. Hatteras Inlet was the most important of these, so it was given 2 forts named Fort Hatteras and Fort Clark.
Okay.
Fort Hatteras was sited adjacent to the inlet on the sound side of the Hatteras Island. Fort Clark was about a half a mile to the southeast, closer to the Atlantic Ocean.
Makes sense.
The forts were not very strong, though.
Oh, no.
Fort Hatteras only had 10 guns mounted by the end of August, with another 5 in the fort, but not mounted.
Oh, jeez.
Fort Clark only had 5. Furthermore, most of the guns were rather light 32-pounders or smaller, of limited range and inadequate for coastal defense.
No.
Hey, guys, we're going to build these for coastal defense, so let's put these guns that are inadequate for coastal defense.
We're going to put 2 worthless forts on this very important port. We'll see what happens.
What are you going to mean? Maybe they'll get close enough.
Well, it wasn't nothing about the defense. The personnel problem was even worse. North Carolina had raised and equipped 22 infantry regiments to serve in the war, but 16 of these had been drawn off for campaigns in Virginia.
I mean, got to do what you got to do.
Right. The 6 regiments remaining were responsible for the defense of the entire North Carolina coastline.
Yeah, that's problematic.
Only a fraction of one regiment, the 7th North Carolina Volunteers, occupied the 2 forts at Hatteras Inlet. Jeez, OP. A fraction. The other forts were likewise only weakly held. Fewer than 1,000 men garrisoned forts around Ocracoke, Hatteras, Clark, and Oregon.
Jeez.
Reinforcements, if needed, would have to come from far away in Beaufort.
Strangely, the military authorities in North Carolina did little to keep the poor state of their defenses secret.
Strangely,
several Yankee captains, victims of either capture or shipwreck, were loosely detained at or near Hatteras Island while waiting to return to their homes.
Loosely detained.
Their cuffs were not as tight. They were allowed virtually free access to the forts and made mental notes of everything.
Of course they did.
When they returned to the north, at least 2 of them gave full and valued descriptions to the Navy Department. Yeah, okay, guys.
Who let them leave?
I don't think they really held prisoners of war for that
Right.
long. They just captured them, got everything they needed from them, and left.
Roll it out,
Get
boys.
the hell out of here.
Wow. The depredations on northern commerce emanating from Hatteras Inlet could not pass unnoticed. Insurance underwriters pressured Union Secretary of the Navy. Insurance underwriters pressured Union Secretary of the Navy Gideon Wells for a remedy.
Like, what do we do?
Right. Wells needed no prodding. He already had on his desk a report from the Blockade Strategy Board suggesting a way to perfect the blockade of the North Carolina coast. He goes, don't worry. Got you covered. Check that out. The board recommended that the coast be rendered useless to the south by sinking old, useless, ballast-laden ships in the inlets to block them.
Oh, smart.
That's smart.
It's like a little blockade, obviously.
Right. Soon
after he received the board's report, Secretary Wells began to implement its recommendation. He ordered Commander H.S. Stellwagen to go to the Chesapeake Bay to buy some suitable old hawks. At the same time, he was told to report his activities to Flag Officer Silas H. Stringham, commandant of the Atlantic Blockading Squadron. These guys, what do you do? I'm the Atlantic Blockading Squadron commander. As such, he was the naval officer in charge of the blockade of the North Carolina coast. This was the first involvement of Stringham with what was to become the attack at Hatteras Inlet.
Oh, okay. Well, in time, he would become the most important person in the expedition.
Okay.
Stringham opposed the plan to block the inlets from the beginning.
Oh, why?
He believed that the tidal currents would either sweep the impediments away or would rapidly scour new channels. Right.
Oh, right. Drag the ships down, and
It's like they don't realize how powerful the ocean is. As he saw it, the rebels could not be denied access to the sounds unless the inlets were actually held by the Union.
Makes sense.
In other words, in order to establish an effective blockade in this part of North Carolina, the forts that the state had set up would have to be captured. Since the Navy could not do it alone, the cooperation of the Army would be needed.
Boom, boom, boom. Well, as it happened, the Army was willing to cooperate. I would assume so, dude. You guys are the same.
I mean, we're in a war, guys.
I mean, kind of got to operate to work together there, pals. Its willingness had something to do with political General Benjamin F. Butler, who was political force that had to be dealt with, but was already emerging as militarily incompetent.
Yeah.
Butler was ordered to assemble a force of some 800 men for the expedition. He soon had 880. He said, you want 800? I got 80 more. 500 from the German-speaking 20th New York Volunteers, 220 from the 9th New York Volunteers, 100 from the Union Coast Guard, which was an Army unit, actually the 99th New York Volunteers.
Okay.
The U.S. Coast Guard, as we know it, did not exist in 1861.
Nope.
Well, I mean, they're still guarding the coast. So.
Right.
And 20 Army regulars from the 2nd U.S. Artillery. The men were put aboard two of the vessels that Commander Stellwagen had purchased, Adelaide and George Peabody. When objection was made that the two ships would not be able to survive a Hatteras storm, Stellwagen pointed out that the expedition could proceed only in fair weather anyway, as a storm would prevent landings.
Right.
I mean, right. Who wants to land in blown off course and maybe hit some rocky coastlines or something?
Yeah, you're done, man. Ain't no sense of even risking it. While Butler was gathering his forces, Flag Officer Stringham was also making preparations. Somehow he learned that the War Department orders to Butler's superior, Major General John E. Wool, had contained the statement. The expedition ordinated in the Navy Department and is under its control.
Oh, so now he's going to be like, meow.
Yep. This is the Navy's job here. Well, I mean, guess, right? Reason.
He is the Navy, right?
Right. And he's telling that to Stringham.
Well, no, that was to Butler.
Right.
Butler's the Army guy.
Yeah. Reasoning that he would be blamed if anything went wrong, he decided to follow his own plans. He selected 7 warships for the expedition: USS Minnesota, Cumberland, Susquehanna, Wabash, Pawnee, Monticello, and Harriet Lane. All but the last were ships of the United States Navy. Harriet Lane was a revenue cutter, part of the United States Revenue Cutter Service. He also included his force, the armed steam Tug Fanny. All right, a little tugboat in there. Needed to tow some of the surf boats that would be used for the landing. Right. Yeah, gotta have a tugboat, right?
So they wanted the Army's cooperation, but then when the Army cooperates, this guy's like, you know what? The plan that we got put forward, I'm going to ignore it and do my own thing.
Right.
Well, we can kind of see where this battle's going already. On the 26th of August, the flotilla, Susquehanna and Cumberland, departed Hampton Roads and moved down the coast into the vicinity of Cape Hatteras. On the way, they were joined by the Cumberland. On August 26th, the flotilla, minus Susquehanna and Cumberland, departed Hampton Roads and moved down the coast of the vicinity of Cape Hatteras. On the way, they were joined by Cumberland. They swung around the Cape on the 27th of August and anchored near the inlet in full view of the defenders there. So they know that they're there now. Colonel William F. Martin of the 7th North Carolina Infantry, commanded at Forts Hatteras and Clark, knew that his 580 or so men would need help, so he called for reinforcements from Forts Ocracoke and Oregon.
Okay.
Unfortunately for him and his garrison, communication among the forts was slow, and the first reinforcements did not arrive until late the next day when it was too late.
Oh, jeez, dude. That's some crazy shit.
We got the Union Department of Virginia, Major General Benjamin F. Butler, with his 9th New York Infantry Regiment, the 20th New York Infantry, 99th New York Volunteer Infantry, which was the Union Coast Guard,
right.
Detachment, 2nd U.S. Artillery Regiment, detachments of sailors and Marines from the Fleet Atlantic Blockading Squadron, with these ships we've already named.
Mm-hmm.
And the Confederates, meanwhile, only have the 17th North Carolina Infantry Regiment, the Fort Hatteras Garrison, and unspecified naval volunteers, including Flag Officer Samuel Barron.
Wow.
Yeah. But they're outmatched by 1,000 people. 935 for the Union, 900 men for Confederates, but the Union do have 7 warships with them.
Right. Yes. Early August 28th, 1861, early morning. USS Minnesota, USS Wabash, and USS Cumberland began to bombard Fort Clark, while the lighter warships accompanied the transports to a point about 3 miles to the east, where the troops had began disembarking.
Is this the first land, what do they call that? When you're taking ships in the land and the soldiers are coming off of them? What do they call that? It's a thing.
I know it is. It's a disembark.
It's like they did in D-Day.
Disembark.
No, disembark means leave.
Yes, that's what they're doing. Their ship.
Is this the first thing to what the fuck is it? Storming a beach, I guess.
Whatever.
Storming a coastline, storming a shore.
Right. Stringham kept his ships moving in a loop with Wabash towing Cumberland. About 11 a.m., USS Susquehanna made her number and joined in.
She's like, you know what? I think it's time.
Right.
It's time.
Right. It's Susquehanna time. The ships would deliver their broadsides against the fort, move back out of range to reload, and then come back into a fire.
Smart stuff. By remaining in motion, they did not let the artillerymen in the fort correct their aim between shots and thereby negated much of the traditional advantage of shore-based guns over those ships. Mm-hmm. This tactic had been used previously by the British and French at the siege of Sevastopol in the Crimean War. British and French, huh?
Nice.
But this was the first time it was used by the U.S. Navy. I would assume so.
Right.
The return fire from Fort Clark was ineffective, either falling short or passing overhead, and no hits were made on the bombarding ships. Shortly after noon, the defenders ran low on ammunition, and about 12:25 p.m., they ran out completely.
Oh, jeez.
At this point, they abandoned the fort, some fleeing to Fort Hatteras, while others took to boats.
Okay, so that's Fort Clark. They needed to get that one out.
That was the lesser manned one. Hatteras is the one with the has what they say 20 guns on it. So we'll see how that goes.
Well, however many people are left from the other fort. Colonel Max Weber, commanding the federal troops already on shore, noted this and put some men in take. Oh, okay, yeah. So Colonel Max Weber was on the shore and noticed that the fort was
Empty.
So he's like,
Get in there,
boys. It's ours. Plant that flag. But the fleet did not know this and continued firing for another 5 minutes.
Why couldn't they just raise a flag real quick? Like, dude, we got it.
All right. It was during this interval of confusion that the landing force suffered its only casualty. One of the soldiers being seriously wounded in the hand by a shell fragment. Jeez. Unavoidable. Totally avoidable. Fortunately, though, some of the troops were able to get the attention. Oh, come on.
They're able to get the attention.
Fortunately, some of the troops were able to get the attention of the gunners on the ships by waving a large American flag. Like, hey, you stupid bastards!
You idiots, is us!
Come on! What are you doing? And the bombardment stopped with no further harm done. Stringham and his captains then turned their attention to Fort
the big
Hatteras.
guy. Well, meanwhile, the landings were not going very well over at the 3 miles down the coastline. Only about a third of the troops were ashore when the rising winds produced surf that swamped and overturned the landing boats, and General Butler had to suspend further attempts to land. Colonel Weber found that he only had 318 men with him. The number included 102 from his own regiment, the 20th New York, but also 68 from the 9th New York, 28 from the Union Coast Guard, 45 artillerymen, 45 Marines, and 28 sailors who could man heavy guns. With several field pieces that they had managed to wrestle ashore through the surf, they could reasonably well defend themselves against a Confederate counterattack, but they were too weak to mount an attack on Fort Hatteras itself. Yeah, you guys need to get some more people in.
Well, Stringham kept his ships moving just as he did at Fort Clark not too long ago. The defenders tried to conserve their ammunition by firing only sporadically, so Stringham thought that perhaps the fort had been abandoned. No flag was flying. Before the battle, the old flag had been reduced to tatters and was never replaced.
Oh, that's not good.
So he's like, usually you got to throw that flag up instantly. He sent Monticello into the inlet to sound it out.
Oh, no.
But then the fort came to life once again. The ship grounded while trying to extricate herself. And in this condition, she was struck by...
Oh, no.
She was struck by 5 shots.
The Monticello, isn't that the big one, too?
Things decent size. None of these did any permanent damage, though, although several sailors received minor wounds. As the day come to a close, the fleet drew off in the face of the threatening weather. The exhausted defenders looked for reinforcements, and the federal troops ashore went to sleep supperless, with water running low and dreading the reinforcements that their opponents hoped for.
Right. Why don't you get your own reinforcements?
You tell me the guys on ground couldn't attack while the ships... Well, I guess that's kind of dangerous.
Can't be doing that.
No.
Sometime after dark, reinforcements began to arrive at the fort. The gunboat CSS Warren Winslow brought in some of the garrison from Fort Ocracoke, and some of the sailors also stayed to help man the guns. This brought the number of men in the fort up to more than 700, with more expected from New Bern. Accompanying the additional troops was Flag Officer Samuel Barron, commanding the coast defense of the North Carolina and Virginia. Colonel Martin, pleading exhaustion, requested Barron to assume command.
Please.
Please, man, I got to get some sleep and stuff, man. He did so, still believing that with the additional troops from New Bern, they would be able to retake Fort Clark.
Retake Fort Clark? Okay.
So they're not only aimed at defending Hatteras, they're going back for Fort Clark.
No, we got to get that. We can't let them have that. Dawn of the second day blasted the hopes of the defenders.
Oh.
The weather moderated enough that the Union fleet could return and resume its bombardment. They were also able to drive off the transport, bringing reinforcements. Oh, no. Somehow a ship was able to get in, but rather than bringing in more troops, she carried away some of the wounded.
But hey, man, I'm just here to get my guys out. Hey, man.
The fleet initially kept in motion, but they soon found that they were out of range of the guns in the fort. After that, the ships did not alter their positions, but poured their fire into the fort with no danger of reply.
Shit. So now they're just boom, 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 boom. There was nothing the men in the forts could do except endure the pain. After about 3 hours, Barron called a council of the officers, and they decided to seek terms, even though casualties had been quite light.
Right.
The actual numbers of dead and wounded are known only very imprecisely, as with pretty much every battle we've seen so far.
Right.
Various reports give the number of dead as from 4 to 7, and the wounded as from 20 to 45. A little after 11 a.m., the white flag was shown. Butler insisted upon surrender, which Barron agreed to. The battle came to a close, and the survivors went into the prisoner of war camps. The list of prisoners had 691 names, including those wounded but not evacuated. I guess you don't want those guys going back to the Confederates and fighting for them, but now you got an extra 691 mouths to feed.
Right.
And how many? I mean, it's happening all throughout the war. You're taking in how many guys? I mean,
that's a significant amount.
Yeah.
Holy shit. 691.
You might as well just keep them at the fort.
Right.
Like, you guys just stay here, I guess. Well, I don't know.
Didn't you hear? You got traded.
Right. Well, these uniforms on.
Jeez. Butler and Stringham left immediately after the battle. They didn't need to be there anymore. The former to Washington and the latter accompanying the prisoners to New York.
Okay.
Critics argue that each was trying to gather credit for themselves.
I know one was they were racing as fast as they could to get back to either Washington or New York.
Well, whoever's going to Washington is getting there first, so I'd rather be Butler. The pair contended, however, that they were trying to persuade the administration to abandon the original plan to block up Hatteras Inlet. In federal hands, it was no longer useful to the Confederacy, and in fact, now allowed Union forces to pursue raiders in the Sound. So, I mean, it worked out great. Although they and their supporters continued to press the case for several weeks, it seems to be unnecessary. They just wanted to block off that thing for some reason. I don't even think they want to man it. That's the problem.
Good for them. The War and Navy departments had already decided to retain possession of the inlet.
Oh, look at that.
Which would be used as the entry point of an amphibious expedition against the North Carolina mainland early the next year. Well, no shit.
Right.
This campaign, known as Burnside's North Carolina Expedition for its senior Army commander, Ambrose E. Burnside,
Sweet.
completely removed the Sounds as a source of commerce raiding activity. Good for that.
I guarantee you ain't nobody getting none of the forts.
Continued federal possession of Hatteras Inlet was considerably aided by Confederate authorities who early decided that the Ocracoke and Oregon batteries were indefensible, so they were abandoned as well.
Of course they were. Why would you... One of the most important ports, and...
They decided it wasn't worth keeping.
I guess. Got other plans?
They clearly didn't care about it in the first place since they didn't defend it well anyways.
Didn't defend it well, not one bit. Some crazy stuff. Stringham's tactic of keeping his ships in motion while bombarding forts was used later by Flag Officer Samuel Francis DuPont at Port Royal, South Carolina. The effectiveness of the practice led to a reconsideration of the value of fixed forts against naval gunnery.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's what I don't understand. In the first couple battles that we had here, the boats would just come up there and they just be like, boom, 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 boom. Taking fire from forts, you know. These guys are like, how about we just keep on moving? Go in there, we shoot, roll around, reload, come back. Like a little
Well, I guess it all depends on where you are, though. If you don't have a big body of water that you can't.
Right. No physical evidence of the battle remains. However, the battlefield is preserved with Cape Hatteras National Seashore. No physical evidence of the battle remains.
It's not
That
even
sucks.
a fort.
Wow. All it is Cape Hatteras National Seashore. That's all it is. It's a seashore. Yep, that's it. Probably right there.
See, I'm picturing a fort with like brick walls and shit. That's not even a fort.
No.
I guess it's a fort, but no walls or nothing. So
It wasn't like Sumter.
right.